Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. I'm looking at the anniversary of the founding of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I think as Americans, it gives us an opportunity to reflect upon an institution that's usually lived behind closed doors. We only give it public attention when we see controversy. Other than that, well, for the most part, nobody really thinks about the operations of the FBI. But the reality is this is a significant institution with significant influence, and it is run by fallen human persons. Every crime they prevent never becomes front-page news. That's the part that we all forget. It's easy to point fingers when we see controversy, not realizing that the vast majority and heavy bulk load of their day job simply goes unrespected, unappreciated. But that's the job. That really is the job. The Bureau officially traces its origins to 1908, July 26th. Attorney General Charles Bonaparte, he created a special corps of investigators within the Department of Justice. Bonaparte himself should be appreciated. He embodied a fascinating combination of public service and Catholic heritage. As the grandnephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, he also belonged to one of Baltimore's prominent Catholic families. He devoted his legal career, actually, to fighting corruption and strengthening federal law enforcement. His vision reflected an older understanding that legitimate government possesses a moral obligation to restrain evil for the common good. Paul expressed that principle in the scriptures as well, that civil authority is God's servant for your good. It does not bear the sword in vain. It serves as the servant of God to execute his wrath on the wrongdoer. Now, that is also, therefore, validation of a biblical stance for the death penalty, that the state really does morally rightly wield that right to execute. Now, that being said, that language makes modern ears uncomfortable. Contemporary society has completely embraced the narratives of anywhere from a moralistic therapeutic mode to feminism. Long story short, we've gotten used to sentimental ideas, especially about everything, but especially about government. But we simultaneously demand security, especially when danger arrives at our door. Everyone critiques law enforcement until we need to dial 911. Well, Scripture nevertheless tells us that civil authority is a genuine vocation toward justice. Augustine argues that political authority exists for the preservation of earthly peace under divine providence. In fact, in City of God, he writes this: "Justice being taken away, then, what are kingdoms except great robberies?" We would do well to learn the value of that statement today. The Catholic tradition has never embraced anarchism. The Church has insisted that law serves human flourishing whenever it conforms to moral truth. The Church teaches us that legitimate public authority exists for the common good. It should guarantee security through morally ordered means without infringing upon God-given liberties. And so agencies that are charged with investigating organized crime, terrorism, espionage, human trafficking, child exploitation, violent corruption, they perform an authentic public service whenever they pursue justice with integrity. Many Catholics have embraced precisely that vocation across the Bureau's history. Thousands of Catholic agents, analysts, attorneys, forensic scientists, linguists, accountants, and support personnel have dedicated their entire careers in virtual silence, I might add, to protecting their fellow citizens. Their names will never become famous. If their investigations are successful, it concludes with paperwork and nothing else. Popular culture loves glamorous spies. The James Bond novels probably had a lot to do with them. But real investigators often spend months reading financial records and carefully crafting the chain of evidence without ever receiving recognition for it. One of the most celebrated examples is Robert Hanssen. His betrayal dominates public memory because his espionage inflicted extraordinary damage upon American intelligence. And obviously movies were made of him, and it's easy to remember those stories. But these infamous examples distort the statistical reality. Millions of honorable public servants have fulfilled their duties faithfully across decades, and then went on to retirement, never to ever make a blip on the public radar. Human psychology remembers spectacular evil much more readily than ordinary virtue. G.K. Chesterton knew that we had a tendency toward this, and that's why he wrote in one of his columns, this was called Tremendous Trifles. The most extraordinary thing in the world is an ordinary man and an ordinary woman and their ordinary children. This is what helps civilization survive. But Catholics, however, I want to encourage us to understand we've contributed significantly throughout several defining chapters of FBI history. Bureau personnel dismantled interstate kidnapping rings during the early 20th century, pursued organized crime families that terrorized neighborhoods through extortion and murder, investigated serial killers whose crimes crossed state lines, disrupted espionage operations during the Cold War, identifying terrorist networks, rescuing exploited children through cyber investigation, pursuing financial fraud. All of these investigations protected citizens who will never know the names of those responsible, and that service harmonizes remarkably well with Catholic moral theology. The Church consistently teaches that defending innocent life is part of justice itself. Thomas Aquinas writes, "Law exists for the common good. Every community requires ordered justice if genuine peace is to flourish, and so peace is far more than the absence of conflict. Authentic peace grows from rightly ordered relationships that are governed by truth and virtue." Catholic intellectual formation has also historically emphasized those habits, and they translate surprisingly well into investigative work. Think about this. The discipline of careful reasoning encourages a tremendous amount of patience. The sacramental imagination values the reality of concrete evidence. Thomistic philosophy prizes the reality of logical coherence. Catholic moral theology distinguishes intention from circumstance and consequence with remarkable precision, I might add. It is the most coherent system to allow us to do so. Those intellectual habits create investigators who seek facts before reaching conclusions. Good detectives avoid ideological fallacy because evidence exposes any form of wishful thinking. Now, even so, every institution is to be held to moral accountability. The FBI has experienced periods of serious criticism. We've seen surveillance abuses, political pressures have occasionally distorted judgment, excessive confidence has sometimes replaced constitutional restraint, and rightful constitutional restraint at that. Catholics do not need to excuse these failures. The Church teaches that every public servant is subject to objective moral law. Leo XIII, for example, he insisted that civil authority derives its legitimacy from God and therefore remains accountable to divine justice rather than personal ambition. In a book that illustrates this great relationship between the Catholic Church and the FBI, this is written by Steve Roswer. I want to make sure we understand that the story of 20th century American political culture revolved in many ways around the engagement, and often the non-engagement, I might say, of Catholic forces and the secular left at the time. And so if you read this book, you're going to see that the stances of Catholic anti-communism had a broader affinity with the United States' stance on anti-communism. And so Catholicism, the FBI, and the cultural and ideological affinities that were affiliated by that coalition continue to inform its pathways moving forward. And so that principle of appealing to an objective morality protects the Bureau. And holding it to moral accountability protects it as well. It doesn't weaken it. Ethical accountability strengthens public confidence. Many Catholic agents continue to live precisely according to that conviction. And so they'll attend Mass. They will pray the Rosary. They'll entrust dangerous operations to divine providence. They'll seek out confession after confronting terrible crimes that scar their human imagination. And so thank God that we do have faithful Christians working and serving within the FBI. The Catholic ethos actually compels us to serve within the common good in this way. And so this anniversary should invite us to a real spirit of gratitude, not cynicism. Healthy patriotism thankfully recognizes the faithful service of men and women who've laid down their lives, while honestly admitting that fallen human institutions will always err. But thank God for a biblical sense of accountability. And most of all, pray for those who lay down their lives for the sake of our freedom and the enforcement of justice. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.